New review of the Hifiman He-1000 first re- revision. Now there's multiple revisions of this headphone. I think the current one is called Special Edition, just a bit of a funky name, but and over time I think they've done gradual changes to this headphone. But what I have in my hands right now is the first iteration, and which is in my opinion also my favorite. So that I'll get into more detail later. So overall, this headphone, back in the days, retailed for around 3,000 USD. These days, it goes for drastically cheaper, mainly because it is not the current flagship anymore, as well as the fact that it has been replaced by the V2 and right now the special edition. So, looking at this, it is starting from the build. It is surprisingly well built. I've seen a lot online about how this headphone is not very well built, how it is not really matching up to the price, but in my hands, it feels really solid. And I have a pair of HD800s here, and these, honestly, while they probably last longer in terms of, longevity and things like that, they don't feel as solid in my hands, and that's probably to do with the fact that they used plastics more than metal, which made it lighter. But of course, it doesn't feel as solid. And I had an LCD X a while back, and that didn't feel as nice in the hands as this does. So, again, it is maybe the build is maybe a little lacking for the price of 3,000 USD back in the days, but honestly, it's actually pretty good, especially considering it's a Hifiman headphone, which has been notoriously bad for build quality. So, moving on from that, taking a look around the headphone, you've got a nice wood veneer that is actually quite pretty. I thought it would be kind of, look kind of cheap and tacky, but it actually looks really good. And the reason why it looks so good, I think, is because it is a really thick wood veneer that actually isn't really veneer at all. So if you take off the pads, which come off with a click, and the pads are these, they're sort of like a hybrid pad where you have the velour on the pad that touches your face. You have fenestrated leather on the inside and solid leather on the outside. Now this is an okay pad, quite comfortable, very large, fits around the ear. No, nobody should have any problem with, bits of your ear touching this, so very comfortable. Now looking at the driver, first things first, I'm not sure if you can see it, but maybe you can. Maybe not. But I think the point has been made. With this headphone, it is a huge driver. Well, that's my hand, and it is almost as big as my hand, so it is a massive driver, and that directly ties into the sound, which I will be explaining in a moment. But as you can see, there is these small magnet bars out the front, and they also have magnets out the back, and the magnets on the back, I'm not sure if you can see it, are actually larger than the magnets out the front. So this is what Hifiman calls an asymmetrical magnet design. As for the specifics of the tech and how it affects the sound, I am not too sure, but I will describe as best as I can. Now, as I said earlier, the wood veneer is actually solid and creates part of the housing, not just, wood veneer glued on top of plastic housing. So it is quite good to see. Definitely built better than I thought it would be. And okay, moving on. Quickly pop this pad back on. Looking at the headband, it is spring steel, along with a nice leather strap with holes punched into it. I'm assuming to reduce the weight. But it is very comfortable, distributes weight well. The only gripe I have with it is the number of clicks that this headband has for adjustment is not enough. It needs more adjusting clicks, and I think this is something they fixed in the V2. They added more click stoppers along the way, so it should fit more heads. So if you do have a chance to try a V1 before you buy it, that would be my recommendation. And to pop and to remove and replace the pad is just easy as pulling it off and popping a new one on, as you saw just now. Didn't take very long, very easy to replace. Again, these yokes, I'm fairly sure these are metal yokes as well. They feel metal when I leave them, out for the night and I pick them up in the morning. These feel very cold, so I'm fairly sure these are metal. Again, a spring steel steep headband, and the cups themselves velour around the grills. You've got these window shade grills, is what they call it. I guess that's just a fancy name for a very open grill. They've got a nice mesh inside to stop any dust and disgusting bits getting in. They've got I think this is a plastic grill. Yep, it's a plastic grill, and they've got a nice metal rim around the edge to give a bit of solid feeling. So now that we've got the build over and done with, let's talk about the sound. So with this headphone, it is a very, I wouldn't say, if you gave me this headphone and you told me the price and you forced me to say, is this top, performance for your money, I would say no. This is clearly not something that I would say is, best price performance headphone by any stretch of the imagination. But subjectively, this is one of the most enjoyable headphones I've ever listened to. And the reason why is the soundstage. Now, most headphones can sound wide. They can sound intimate. But very few headphones sound huge. And this, I think, directly ties in with the size of the driver. This whole thing is a driver and it is absolutely huge. It is as big as some speaker domes. So that right next to your ear creates some of the tallest imaging and tallest sounds that I've ever heard from any headphone. Combine that with very good separation, detail, and imaging, makes it feel like that you've got huge concert-sized speakers either side of your head, and there's just sound coming from all directions and is truly magnificent. I don't know how to put it into words, but it is very special, and it's something that I think really is unique to Hifiman headphones, high-end ones with this size drivers. Now, something else for comparison would be a HD800. Now, the HD800 is a headphone that also is famous for a huge soundstage, but the soundstage is different in that it is not a tall soundstage. It is still tall compared to most headphones, but compared to the HE1000, it is not that tall. But what it does do better is significantly is width. Now, the HE800 is still, in my opinion, the widest headphone outside of those bizarre, AKG K1000s, those type of headphones. It is still the widest to me, except for those. But again, those I don't consider to be real headphones. More like speakers strapped on the side of your head. So now that's out of the way. You probably have a good idea of the soundstage and imaging. Moving on to the actual sound. How did I find the details of this headphone? I think that the details probably matches up to maybe a little worse than HD800, to be honest. That isn't to say that the detail's bad, because HD800, again, I think has some of the best imaging for your dollar, out of any headphone in the market. Honestly, I think if you picked up the HD800, you have to go all the way towards flagships before you get something that can out-resolve that headphone. So keep that in mind when you purchase this headphone. It is close, but it's not quite there. And as for dynamics, this doesn't have the best dynamics, but it has decent dynamics. So keeping that in mind, you might think that this is not a very good performer technically, and you would be right. From a technical perspective, this is a good performer, but not the best for its price. However, all this really ties in a very cohesive package, because the good detail combined with the softer approach to the sound, combined with a huge soundstage and imaging, not a wide soundstage per se, but a very tall soundstage, gives this a very unique and pleasing sound. And I think that's the best selling point of this headphone. It is some of the most pleasant listening experiences that you can get in a headphone. And I think at the end of the day, it's important to think about whether you really enjoy a headphone or you're just trying to hit every detail. And different people may have different priorities, but for me, I just want to enjoy music, and this is some of the most enjoyment I've had out of any headphones, period. Now, the frequency response for this headphone, I think, is pretty good. It is actually very good if you think about the competition. I think I have a very strict preference in terms of frequency response. I like a very Harman shape response, and this gets fairly close except for the treble where there's a bit of brightness around the 8K, I think, region, which makes things a little sharp sometimes, but again, not much EQ is required to fix these. Everything else seems pretty in line, pretty pleasing to me. And if you think about the other headphones in the market, like the Audezys, think about the H800, think about the Focal Utopia, all those have a myriad of frequency response issues that some of them are a lot worse than these. So again, I don't think that's any issue. I think for most people, this is going to be a spot on frequency response that no one's going to have any issues with. So I think that this is a very good, very well tuned headphone, apart from one small spot in the treble, but that's something you can easily fix through amp pairings, through EQ, through whatever method you choose. Now, as for power requirements, this headphone is quite hard to power. If you've ever used an old HE500, it is around this, a similar difficulty power, so you really need an amp that can push at least 1 watt of power. Now, I'm not one of those people that will tell you to use speaker amps for your headphones, because honestly I really don't think you need that much power. I think people over exaggerate a little bit, but these you do need a little bit at least. Something at least like a Magni, like a Fio K5, or a maybe the minimum to power this would be a JDS Labs Objective 2 amp, something like that. So keep that in mind when you buy this headphone. But again, if you're buying a headphone that's worth around 3,000, you'd probably have an amp ready for these. So overall, this is an exceptionally pleasing headphone. I think that it is something that will appeal to people that don't chase every single last bit of detail, that just want a very unique and interesting listening experience. And for that end, I think this is worth its price, but it will not be for everybody. And if you do have this headphone, I recommend not to have this as maybe your only headphone, but pair it with something that you have for critical listening, such as the HD800, which has a very clinical sound, as opposed to this more pleasing and interesting sound. So overall, excellent headphone, and worthy of being called a flagship. Although it's not the best value flagship, but it is still undeniably cut from a different cloth from a lot of the mid-fi market.